Welcome everyone to our first meeting of the year. Our season starts in September, ends around May or June. And as always, when we start the season, we like to start with an introduction to SQL Server. I'd like to welcome everyone from around the world. Let me know in the comments which country and city you're from. Klaus, I know, is from Europe, Germany, I believe, or Austria.
No, Germany. Karl is Austria. I'm Klaus.
Is Austria. All right.
Germany.
All right.
You always think that I'm Karl, but I'm Klaus.
Yes. Welcome everyone. So before we get started with today's topic, I'd like to share my screen and give you some news regarding the world of Access User Groups. Let me share my screen here. Stand by. All right, you should be seeing my screen. I have the website Access User Groups up and running here. One major improvement from actually Ben was one that suggested is that we put links on our homepage for upcoming events. And now you see all the, when you go to AccessUserGroups.org, you'll see that we've got today's meeting, then we got tomorrow, Access Latino, and then on September 17th, Access España, then Access ET, Access for Beginners, which is Susan Pine's group, Access Lunchtime, which is Maria Barnes. So always good, because with this now you can just go join WebEx meeting on that day and not have to look for a link. Or my favorite, you can click on Add to Calendar to add it to your Outlook. So I encourage you to do that. It's easier. And
I didn't know that.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm always looking to improve upon that. Another thing, big improvement also, is you'll notice on the upper right-hand corner here, we now have a logo for the YouTube channel. So if you click on our YouTube channel, that launches a YouTube channel, and you can see all the latest videos.
I see.
And we already have we have a huge audience of videos. People, some of these videos have been viewed up to 1,000 times, which is great. It's been brought to my attention that the Access 3264 has been watched over 1,000 times. That session was led by Susan Pine. So always good to see that the huge amount. We do make a small fee for this. It helps us with the hosting and paying for the WebEx account. So I debated over the years whether to do ads or not, no ads, but I left them in there for now because it does generate a few $100s every quarter. So it does help us with the cost. One of the things that, from my personal perspective, is I've lost quite a lot of weight in the last 12 months. And it really has culminated into some really surprising results. Before I started this journey, I weighed 285 pounds. And that was probably, I want to say 3 years ago. And then I hired a personal trainer and I went to a gym. I modified my diet habits. I'm happy to say that I've lost 52 pounds so far in this journey. And I went from a size 44 to a size 34 in waist. And it's just been a wonderful journey. And now, the last time I went to get my health exam test for my sugar, there's a measurement called the A1C. And if you're diabetic, you probably are familiar with that. I'm diabetic by type 2, which means that I can produce insulin, but just my body's not tolerant enough. But my last diabetic reading was the A1C was 6.5. And so 7 is when you're diabetic. So I'm actually pre-diabetic, and I've been able to get off the insulin shots and pills, and just been a great journey. Now if I can figure out how to bring my hair back, I'd be a happy man. But that's...
you win if you lose weight. Diabetes 2 is normally a problem of being overweighted. Like me, I know that because I have it too.
Well, my doctor wants me to lose another 20 pounds, 22 pounds, so we'll see. He gave me another 12 months to lose that, so we're looking forward to that. The other thing I wanted to let you guys know, what I've been reading a lot lately on, is on Powerapps and the Common Data Service. And I've been watching some great videos on that. And one of them is, I'd like to show you this quick demo. And if you can mute your microphone, I appreciate it, everyone. If you can mute your microphone during this part of the meeting, that'd be great. Thank you. This is a Power App demo, which I'm going to pass this link on to you. And it really is, it shows you the power and depth of Power Apps and how far they've come along. And hold on a second, I gotta mute everybody because I'm getting feedback somewhere. Just bear with me here a second. Let me mute everybody. All right. I hope I didn't mute myself, but let me know in the comments if I did. All right, that's much better. I'm hearing feedback. So let me send you, I send you this link, right? This is a, how amazing and simple it is to add virtual reality to Power Apps now. And this is a Power App where you have an air conditioning technician who can go to do a site survey at a customer location and be able to virtually place an air conditioner there. And one of the things that you'll see in this video is the ability to rotate objects within the Power App. So it uses a catalog and Azure services to render the image in your Power App and being able to rotate it and see it every side. And then you can use the virtual reality aspect of it to place the unit in the outdoors using your cell phone, so you can see how it would look when it's finally placed. And I thought this was pretty cool demo. And it was surprisingly easy to do this. It's a low-code Power Apps, as you know, it's a low-code solution. One of the reasons that I'm reading up on this is because we're a Microsoft Gold partner, which I'm happy to report. We became Microsoft Gold last month. And we are now heavily focused on providing our clients with this kind of experiences. This is another instance where you use a virtual reality tape to measure the measurement on the ground. You can use that to measure the measurement, and then the catalog will show you which units can fit in that space, which I thought was pretty neat. So you can measure it virtually with your cell phone and then see all the units. These are all the units that would fit in that space. I thought that was pretty neat. So I passed along the link to this video. I encourage you to use it. It's a very short video. It's just was a real eye-opener for me. The next one I want to show you is, in addition to Power Apps, I've been also reading up on the Common Data Service and Power Apps in general. And I thought this video was really brought it home to me. And one of the reasons I love this video is because the author, who is a Microsoft professional, which I'm not sure where he's at because this video is 1 year old, and I try to reach out to him because to book him for a future session at Access with Sql Server. But one of the things that he goes on mentioning about this is that if you know Microsoft Access, then you know what Power Apps. And he talks about the ease of use and how to create Access applications. And he does an introduction on Power Apps. It says if you're an Access developer or know Microsoft Access, you know how easy the low-code Power Apps can be because they're very similar. And one of the things he mentions, one of the great points is, and this is the same misperception I had when I first started down this journey, is that the common data service is the first thing one thinks is the database. And like, wait, what am I getting into? Is this an Azure database service or is this SQL Server? Really, it's not. And this is where he mentions about Microsoft Access. He actually goes on and on about Microsoft Access. So I'm going to advance this video to get to my next point. I'm advancing the video here. It's great to see how he looks. And one of the things about, before you know what common data service is, you have to talk about, he talks about how you would need to invest in these resources if you were not to use a common data service, to use an application throughout your enterprise. Now, a lot of companies around the world are using Power Apps because there is just simply not enough developers. And the need for development is going to skyrocket as you have that baby boomer generation is retiring. You don't have anybody to fill in the voids, right? So, I mean, if you look at our Access developer groups, and the meetings I go to, these are older crowds, 40s, 50s, 60s, and that we're not exactly attracting the youngest talent here. But in general, you've got this huge population shift of people retiring now, and then there's this need to continue to automate, continue the program. So Power Apps is a application platform called low-code application. Going to allow these companies to be able to create applications quickly. But one of the problems you have when you scale an application like the one I just showed you with air conditioning, if you were to scale that to 1,000 users, all the things that you would need to configure for a, the infrastructure as a service, or as a platform as a service, or software as a service. I'm going to advance this video, again, make my point here real quick. We're going to be talking about introduction to the SQL Server here in a minute, but yeah, I know. I wonder how I can not share the up next thing. Let me see if I can do that here. Hold on a second. There you go. That's better. All right. What about Blazor? Actually, I don't know what Blazor is. You caught me off guard there. I don't know what Blazor is, Ben. All right. Here, it talks about how you would need to establish these virtual machines to service your platform and everything else. It's really quite fascinating. It's quite fascinating discussion how you would have to create into your application to support 1,000 users, 5,000 users, 10,000 users for this little application that runs on a tablet or a phone or a web on a desktop. And all of this architecture is taken care of automatically with the Common Data Service, which is the point he makes in the video. And I promise you it's not too technical. He just goes on a little bit about what this is all about. He talks about high availability, what you need. And basically his point is high availability is hard to both architecture and to budget. It's not cheap. All of that you get with Common Data Service. Let me just advance. So here's what I wanted to get you. You got sizing, installing, deploying, configuring. Microsoft does all this with you with Common Data Service. So this video is a real eye-opener for me. I do encourage you to see it. I think I did give you the link to it in the in there. If I didn't, let me try doing it again. So just a quick video there on how to, if you're interested in going down this path. I find it fascinating. I think the Powerapps has, when we first looked at it, it's hard to believe it's been almost 5 years now. When we first looked at it, I was one of the main Axe developers that dismissed it as something that was not, and back then it was not mature. Simply was not mature enough, wasn't powerful enough. Now it's really got into its own with the virtual reality tools, which is, admittedly, most of us wouldn't use that, but it's just an example how powerful the service is. And that would couple with the other elements of Power Platform, which is Power Virtual Agents, which are bots, Power Flow, Power Automate. It's just an environment that I believe Access developers can flourish, can really flourish and cut down. Look, I had a call last week from a potential customer. He calls me up and says, Juan, I've got this Excel database where I keep track of futures trading commodity contracts. Now, if you ever dealt with commodity contracts, you know that stuff is not easy to deal with, right? But basically, what it is, you have to, let's take corn, for example. So corn contract, the 3-month corn contract right now is more valuable because Iowa had that derecho a month back, and it really screwed up with the production of corn in Iowa. So right now, if you had a corn contract before the derecho in Iowa, that contract was much more valuable than after the derecho right now, because you make out like a bandit right now. So that's an example of a commodity contract that comes up in 3 months, 6 months, right? They have different ranges. But what really impressed him was that I knew this stuff. He says, Juan, he's like amazed. He says, wow, I can't believe you don't know how many X developers I talk to, and they just don't get it. They don't know what contracts are or anything like that, commodity, trading, everything. You just got it. I'm like, yeah, that's one of the advantages I have is I understand. I try to understand the business problem before I code, which is our number one rule. So basically, I quoted him, to make a long story short, I quoted him like $25,000 for this access with SQL Server system in the cloud, right? And basically, it's going to allow him to track these contracts for his clients. So he manages the contracts, right? So he'll go to a dairy. He was explaining to me. He'll go to a dairy farm in the U.S. and they'll need to buy. They'll have contracts for hay and for food for the cows and all these other contracts. And he manages all that for them so they can focus on production as opposed to contract negotiation and maintenance. He says, Juan, I want to be sincere with you. I love the fact you understand contracts and commodities. I don't love the price. I think it's a little on the high side. I'm like, okay, I get it. I'm not. I'll be the first one to tell you, I'm not the cheapest guy in the block, right? You're gonna find cheaper Access developers. I tell them. So you're welcome to find somebody out there who can help you out. But just like you mentioned, I do understand contracts. I do understand commodities. I'm a Microsoft Gold partner. We're one of the few partners that do Access SQL Server. I go on my spiel. I got the spiel I go about, right? When I sell things, because I'm the sales director here. And then after I had that call, he's like, you know what? Send me the proposal. Let's talk. So after I had that call, I'm thinking to myself, what if instead of using an Access application, we did a Powerapps application, low code, right? How much more easier it is. And then I realized it's an excellent opportunity for my organization to get their feet wet more with Powerapps, because we've done Powerapps for other clients, but I think this particular project, I think will be great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to approach them later this week and say, look, instead of doing an Access with SQL Server backend, which is something we'll do with no problem without losing any sleep, I'd rather just provide you a much more affordable solution, which is Powerapps using CDS, and probably going to be half the cost. So instead of $20,000-$25,000, probably looking at $10,000 to $15,000 to get it up and running. So that's just some of the things that I'm going through now as a business. Now that we're Microsoft Gold, and one of the things that we also did is we thought our marketing efforts right now. Everything in our marketing is revolving Access. Screens Juan Soto or Access, right? Just search for Juan Soto. You'll see me and the guy who plays for the Washington Nationals. He's a lot more famous than I am, of course. But it really is. I've seen the comments here as I'm talking. Blazer is part of ASP Gordon or two flavors. All right, thank you, Klaus. Thank you very much. I'm gonna look at that. Appreciate it. So so we are more focused now on the Power Platform, Power BI, and because these are tools we're currently using. So instead of the brand being the Access experts in IT Impact, we want to go. I'm gonna debut my brand here, which is something that you're going to see is discover the power of your data. I have this pencil here because I'm using them. I'm seeing my profile. But discover the power of your data is the brand that we're going to be pushing going forward. We're going to do a big push later this month once discover the power of your data.com is revamped. Right now it's an older design. We're revamping it and making it much more desirable. But I think discover the power of your data says more as to what we can do helping our clients. What we really do, right? Because whether it be Access or VB.net, the right tool for the job. But what I always tell my employees is what we are as business consultants first, that use business, that you solve business problems with Microsoft Access and SQL Server. And so now we're saying we're going to try to see if we can use the right tool, regardless it's VB.net, which we do produce, or PHP solutions. We do have those programmers or staff for Microsoft Access. Most of the stuff we do is Microsoft Access, because you really can't beat the budget, right? So that example I just showed you, where I quoted in between 20 and 25,000, would be between 40 and 50,000. It was VB.net, because that's the reality of it. It's just VB.net takes more to do. So those are the things that have been happening lately during the summer. So you're all caught up. I also did a really nice presentation for Excellent in America, where we talked about what is the timeline, if you will, for Microsoft Access, or the product roadmap for Microsoft Access. Let me see if I can bring that up here. I thought the URL was pretty neat because it afforded us product roadmap, Microsoft Access, because it affords us an inside look as to what is the Microsoft Access team thinking about doing and concentrating going forward, right? And so you've got the ability to limit this. Let me just limit this access. So there are 6 here, and let me just send you this roadmap for Access so you can follow along locally. There's 6 things that they're working on in the future or near future. One of the things I'm most excited about is the Graph Connector. The Graph Data Connector is completely wrong name for it, because when I first heard it, I thought we were talking about graphing. And I'm like, okay, I got Power BI for it. But that's going to be further from the truth. Microsoft Graph there's a concept where you can tap into the Microsoft ecosystem to get the data easily. So for example, right now when we develop applications, we can authenticate through the Active Directory and see what the groups are, right? So we usually ask a customer to have several groups, an admin group, a read-only group, and a power user group, at least those three. Well, we use APIs to tap into the local Active Directory that is on the PC with Microsoft Graph. It's just a call, and it's just like another table. It shows up and accesses in that table. It's just a wonderful way because now I have to do APIs. I can query against the table easily. It's much more easy to program. I can just use a simple record set to find somebody which groups they belong to the Active Directory. So Azure Graph is going to be a real game changer. And one of the reasons it's not out, and this is some inside information for you, it's not out yet, is because when they first launched it in beta, they realized it was too powerful. Now you were getting aspects about their names, their home address, and their phone number, and they're like, oh no, we need to pull this and then make sure that there's a security aspect of this because they were opening it way too much. And one of the things that I think that's it's going to be easier too is I can tap into the Exchange mailbox of a customer and read their emails into Access as a simple table. And that's something that really is going to be powerful for me as opposed to me having to launch Outlook and then parse through the files and folders. Have you ever done a project where you integrate Outlook with Access? You know it can be like a wild, wild west with Outlook. And it ends up being, and thank you very much, Klaus, for the graph there. Ends up being pretty, so Klaus just shared a link to graph. It ends up being a mess interacting with Outlook. So graph, great addition. The modern web browser control, this is something, I don't know if you guys ever use it, the web browser control and Access is IE, Internet Explorer, back from the days, right, when I had more hair on my head. Now they're actually going to use Chromium Edge, which is the latest and greatest. So I'm excited about the possibilities of being able to design a Power App, a form in Power App, and then integrate that into my application and Access, as opposed to launching another browser, what have you, or displaying Power BI reports within Access, Power BI analysis within Access, as opposed to launching a separate URL. So that's going to be good. Enabling large address aware for 32-bit access. Usually what we've been doing lately is we've been converting people to 64-bit, and every time we do a job for a client, we always make sure it's compatible with 32 and 64, so we have a common code base. But that's going to help really good too, this 32-bit, and now you'll go from up to 4 gigabytes of memory. If you really have a memory problem and that 4 gigabytes is not going to resolve, you should really go to 64, right? That's 64. You'll be able to see the entire memory scope, gigabytes of memory. This is something that Klaus, I'm sure, will appreciate, being able to use the SSMA, SQL Server Migration Assistant, without having to download the ACE distributor engine. That's going to be nice because right now the ACE engine, when you do click to run or Office 365, it's isolated, as opposed to when you get the product from a retail store, not 365, it's available to you, SQL Server Manager. So that's good. Same thing with DAO. This is one that's going to be really nice. The SQL Monocle editor. Wow. This is a real game changer where you'll be able to use the same Monocle editor, use a Visual Studio Code, and you can get IntelliSense, right? And all the other great things that SQL Server Studio can do with T-SQL. That's going to be great. And then we have the extended time and date. So I'm not too thrilled about that because I don't have that much of a problem with it. But please bookmark this page because it really does afford you an inside look as to what they're doing in the Microsoft team. All right, so somebody, here looking at the chats here, so bear with me here while I do the chats. Let's see, that would be great help. We had to do a project where the user wanted a Google map on the report but couldn't get it to print. Took a lot of rigmarole to get that to happen. And who was that? Let me see. My chat window is also. Oh, David, thank you very much for that comment. Appreciate it. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with today's topic. This is a topic that's near and dear to me because of the fact that I started this topic many moons ago when I first started presenting in SQL Saturdays at SQLSaturdays.com. Let me share another monitor here. and be share. Give me a second here while I do that. There you go. All right, you should see the presentation now. All right, good. Yeah, so introduction to SQL. Now, what it is I've made my career in the blog. You can see a lot of the stuff I'm talking about in the blog on optimizing access to SQL Server. When I first started this journey, I want to say 15 years ago with Access SQL Server, there really wasn't much information. In fact, I purchased a book off of Amazon that was solely on this topic, and there hasn't been a book published since, but it really helped me a lot. And I encourage you to find the book, and you still can get it. And for now, it's the only book on Microsoft Access SQL Server that's focused just on that. So you'll be able to easily locate it on Amazon. But I started focusing on this because it's really a beautiful thing when you can combine Access with SQL Server, right? Now, SQL Server, one of the things that it does is just really liberates access. Like, for example, you've probably heard me say this before. I used to have a insurance client who was the largest insurance company in the U.S. They insured storage units, and they had 100 users using Microsoft Access with SQL Server in the back end. And they have no problem. I mean, we even recorded conversations they had with people calling to do a claim, and we would store those recordings in SQL Server, and the managers can then play it back using the Access interface. It was just an amazing way to run that insurance company. And so being able to do all these things, securing your data, right? Because right now, as you probably heard me say this before as well, I've walked into situations where people have credit card information, social security numbers, and Microsoft Access. One of the first things I tell them is you can't do that. It's just really too easy to walk out the door with this information. Now, in the old days, you would have workgroup files, and you can fine-tune the work model, but that's just gone out the window. Now it's just a single password to secure it. So if they know the password, which most likely they do if they're a user of the system, they can copy the file on a USB thumb drive and walk out. Now, granted, you could probably get that data using SQL Server, but that requires higher learning, making it more difficult, right? So the name of the game is to put up barriers when it comes to securing your data, and SQL Server allows you to do that. So we call it web-enabled access because the data is on the web. I just want to clear that up. The web-enabled access means the data is on the web using Azure SQL or your own SQL Server in the cloud. That's what that means. Don't want to give the impression that we're talking about Access web apps. Now, there's some really bad misconceptions when it comes to going down this road, right? And that is, I don't want to appear or give you the false impression that migrating access to SQL Server is a slam dunk. It isn't. In fact, I can almost bet you that if you were to migrate your Access database, we're talking about a fairly complex database, right? Simple database, not so much, but a fairly complex database with lots of forms, lots of reports, lots of queries, lots of code, may even run slower after you've migrated the data to SQL Server and then link those tables back to the front end. And that's just not the case. So we're going to be talking about how to resolve those issues here in this presentation. Now, people sometimes ask me when I'm talking to customers who don't have SQL Server currently, they want SQL Server locally, not in the cloud. They say, well, what do we need? It says, honestly, why do you need SQL Server Express, man? If you're talking 10 users, 25 users, you don't really need a license for SQL Server. It's like going from a bike to a car, right? And when you go from a bike to a car, you don't care if the car, well, maybe you do. You don't care if the car is a Tesla or a Lamborghini. You're just happy you got four wheels, right? You're just happy I don't have to be in the bike anymore, and I can get to my destination a lot faster because it's a car, right? And so it's that's like going from Access to SQL Server Express. Now, because SQL Server Express is the you go to SQL Server Standard, which is a much more expensive car. The fact of the matter is that I tell people it really doesn't matter what version it is. Let me bring up the comments. I know you guys are probably leaving comments. I apologize. I lost sight of the chat window. Let me move that over here. I have 3 monitors in my setup here. Let me move this so I can see the comments as we're going. Because I muted microphones, so we're getting some feedbacks. Lots of links there. Thank you very much for sharing the links there. All right. No comments up to yet. All right. Now, you're going to need, as part of this journey, you're going to need to become familiarized with SQL Server Management Studio. And one of the things that I always enjoyed as part of this experience is how much of a great tool SQL Server Management Studio is compared to the Access VBE. It's maintained constantly by Microsoft. They put a lot of effort into it compared to the integrated development environment of Microsoft Access and Office in general. What it seems like it's been stuck in the last 20 years in the same spot. I mean, think about the fact that we don't have collapsible procedures in BBE, right? In VBA, where you can click a plus or minus and collapse all your stored procedures in the module window. We don't have IntelliSense when it comes to tables and field names. We don't have so many things that you can have with SQL Server Management Studio. So if you've never used SQL Server Management Studio, you're in for a great surprise. Just a wonderful tool. It's going to allow you to really, really wonder, gosh, I wish we had some of these things in Access. That's why I'm so happy about the Monocle stuff. I'm hoping that that becomes a reality sooner rather than later. I also emphasize you gotta use the latest drivers. Now, one of the things that I absolutely floors me is I still run into cases where customers are using, I kid you not, they're using the Windows SQL Server driver that comes with Windows, which is probably probably one of the first drivers that they came out with SQL Server. And they asked me, well, you know, we're having speed issues and we're having performance issues and it's not really working well. And that's why we decided to call you. And then I go look, and I look at their DSN and they're using a native driver that came with Windows. And I tell them, look, you probably are 20 years behind the times. So what we need to do is upgrade you to the latest drivers. Now, I still see people still using Client 11, which is, don't get me wrong, still a good driver. Client 11 is great, but because SQL Server has evolved so much with the Azure and integration with Azure directory services, you really need to use the latest drivers. That means 2 drivers, one ODBC and one ADODB. The ODBC one is what you're going to use when you do queries like pass-through queries and link tables, and the ADODB driver is what you're going to use when you, I think that's misspelled. It says OLADE. It should be OLADB. Well, we have somebody who's trying to get into the meeting. Let me give him the link. Sorry. Let me send him the link. Join WebEx. Click on Join WebEx link.
My webpage has the blog here has the links to the drivers, always in use.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
ODBC, OLEDB, and SSMH.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So I think it's quite useful. I did it mostly for myself, but okay.
No, I appreciate it. They're not. They don't mainly. I mean, it's kind of a little bit better, but they don't really make it easy to find that stuff on the web. And one of the biggest problems is I hired Mark Edwards to join. He's been with us already, I believe, going on several months now. An employee of mine, and one of the things that blows his mind away was when you go to download the OLEDB driver and the ODBC driver, it doesn't tell you which one is 64-bit, which one is 32-bit. It just shows you the 32-bit version. Now, I know which one is 32-bit because it's smaller of the two on that page. So people end up, they're like, okay, which one do I need? I guess I download both. And then now it's a no-brainer because if you try to install 32-bit on 64-bit system, it errors out. And then you go to the 64-bit version and it does 64-bit version, excuse me, and then it works. And so I had to train people on that. It says, look, when you go there, you pretty much want the 64-bit version because it's irrespective of which version of Office you have, right? The drivers that you need are based on the OS, not Office. So if you have Office 32-bit on Windows 64, you still need the Windows 64-bit driver. So that's something to keep in mind. Mark, thanks for joining us. I just mentioned you about how you were frustrated with the documentation on the driver's page and not knowing which one is 32 or 64-bit until I told you that the 64-bit version was a little bit more weightier, more the 64-bit version has more bigger file. Now there are limitations to SQL Server Express, and they're very well known. And remember, I said going from Access to SQL Server Express is like going from a bike to a car, but it's a really entry-level car. I mean, Microsoft is not dumb. They want you to use Express. They want you eventually to migrate to the standard version of Express. So they're not going to give a SQL Server. They're not going to give you everything, right? Express is like the taste. All right, here's the taste of life in the fast lane. We want you to upgrade to the SQL Server standard version, or even the enterprise version. And so I believe now one of the limits is 11 gigabytes of hard drive space. Now, I've had customers who are taxing their access. They're approaching that 2 gigabyte limit in access, right? And they call me up and says, I can't hardly do anything with this database. It's running slow. I'm like, yeah, well, let me look at your database. And it's really almost 2 gigabytes of space, the file, the backend file. So as you approach that 2 gigabyte limit, it really starts slowing down on you, and it becomes more unstable. But when you take that 2 gigabytes of access database and you upload to SQL Server, what I've seen is a drastic reduction. I don't know, Klaus, if you've seen that too, but I've seen a drastic reduction from 2 gigabytes of hard drive space to 400 megabytes. Right? So not only SQL Server is faster than Access, more reliable, you're not going to have crashing issues with SQL Server, in the sense that you're not going to have data corruption issues like you have with an Access backend, right? Sharing it with 20 users, for example. But also you're going to be maximizing the hard drive space. So 10 gigs of hard drive space in SQL Server, a file that's 10 gigabytes big, and you're talking about millions upon millions of records still. So it's just a great way of doing that. The drawback also is 1 gig of RAM, and here, there's a second session to this, which is we'll talk about in October. We're going to talk a little bit more about performance characteristics expressed, but 1 gig of RAM, it should be more than enough, but there are instances where it does hamper you. So it doesn't matter how many cores SQL Server, the SQL Server has, the server itself. It's only going to use one core. So if most servers these days have multiples of 4. I just had a customer brought a new server for the SQL Server. He actually bought a license of SQL Server Standard. They brought a new box from Dell. I think it running like 32 cores. So it's just an unbelievable amount of processing power. So if you were to go out and buy a server, now I tell a customer, you buy what you can afford, right? So I'd rather you buy a $5,000 server versus a $1,000 server, but if that's what you can afford, $1,000 server, it's still going to have 6, 7, 8 cores. 6 or 8 cores. And it's still going to run circles around Microsoft Access backend. All right, so here's the number one go tip I tell people. And when I do this presentation around the US, when I used to travel back then, this is my number one tip, and that is, if you're having problems with your Access system now, don't migrate to SQL Server. You need to resolve these issues now. I mean, let's say, when I say slowness, right? I mean, obviously, if you got 30 users, 50 users in Access, I mean, I can get systems running. I'm Access MVP. I can get just running 25 users. But if you have 25 users in a system, it's going to be slow in certain situations. But if you only have one user and it's terribly slow, there may be an issue not so much with the database itself, but the design of the database. Not so much with the data, but the design of the database. Poorly designed tables, probably tables with no indexes, which Access allows you to do. SQL Server does still allow you to do that too, but there's an issue with that when you link it. Queries that are misdesigned, forms that are just not optimized. I mean, you have a whole slew of issues. And so one of the first things you got to tackle is resolve the problems in Access first, then upgrade to SQL Server. Because if you don't do that, if you don't take care of these things now, it's just going to get a lot worse with SQL Server. Because SQL Server, again, remember my first slide, it's not panacea. it's going to make things slower still. So if it's slow in Access, it's going to get slower still in SQL Server because you're dealing with server itself, and it's not optimized at that point once you upload it. It's just a terrible mess. So you got to resolve these issues first. Now, here's one of my favorite tools, one of Claude's favorite tools too, is SQL Server Migration Assistant. This is a tool specifically designed for Access databases. It's called SQL Server Migration Assistant for Access because there are other versions for Oracle, for DBase, I guess. There's a whole slew of versions. Now, it's funny because several years back, when I went to the Access MVP Summit in Redmond, Washington, one of the sessions, when we go there, we call it visiting the mothership. And I love going there because I recharged my batteries, and they treated us really well. They dined us and wined us during 4 days, and they gave us all kinds of gifts like this jacket I got, MVP jacket here. Boy, I miss those days. All right, so one of the sessions was they brought us the SQL Server Migration Assistant Manager. And it's funny because he has on one of his slides all the versions of SQL Server Migration Assistant, Oracle, DBase, you name it. They had SAP, right? Microsoft wants to encourage these companies to use SQL Server, and one they want to encourage us to provide a free tool allows you to migrate to SQL Server. Say, hey, come on over to the promised land from Oracle, right? And then we realized that Access wasn't on there. It says, hey, if you come and you present to 20 Access MVPs, back then there was 20, right now it's 17. If you come to present to 20 Access MVPs in a room, we're going to call you out. And one of the things we call them out is, where is the Access version? Oh, yeah, I forgot it. Then he turns around with a straight face and says, actually, Access is the #1 SQL Server migration system. I'm like, what? Are you kidding me? You come in here and you don't even list it, only to tell us it's the #1 use based on the data they collect. Most more popular version, but uses of SSMA is Access. Thanks, Jeff, for that comment. So 2 million records, wow. That is, my hat's off to you, my friend. To migrate 2 million records to SQL Server, that is something else. If it weren't for a SQL Server Migration Assistant, try. Jeff, why don't you tell people how long it would take for Access to insert all those records in SQL Server? I think I would wager it would time out by the time it did 200,000 records, and that's going to be on one of my next slides here. But when you have a project, a migration project, right, and we do these all the time. In fact, Mark Edwards is on the call right now. He's one of our employees, and he's got several projects where he's migrating. He just did a migration over the weekend. Thank you, Mark. He worked over the weekend with a client to migrate their data to the cloud using SSMA. You're going to have stages of being able to need to upload the data, right? And one of the things I love about SSMA is you save the project, and there's an option where you can upload the data only to SQL Server. So the first time you do it, it creates the tables for you in SQL Server, and then it uploads the data. The second time you do it in beta and final rollout, and sometimes you have multiple betas, you have to update the data. It's just a question of right-clicking on the Access backend, the latest backend, and then uploading the data only to SQL Server. And it's really seamless, and it's great. And I, for sure, would find it very difficult to do these projects if it weren't for the SSMA. Excuse me. Now, when you launch SQL Server Migration Assistant, not only can you migrate the tables, but you also can migrate queries to views. I don't bother. The grand majority of queries run fine without views in SQL Server. I just leave them local in the Access front end. But you can have SQL Server do the views, and there is a distinct advantage of that. Sometimes you have a view that's quite complex. One of my friends, Ben Sackridge, who's on the call right here today, he just was talking to me how he was able to create logic to update queries to SQL Server. That's not easy. There's all kinds of issues to migrating update queries to T-SQL from Access. when you start this journey, one of the issues you're gonna come across is you need to create views. And one of the problems with creating views is you need to do it in a view syntax, in the T-SQL syntax that the SQL Server can understand. Now, if it's a simple select query in Access, that's going to be easy. That's a slam dunk. That's going to work in SQL Server. But if it's not, it's a little bit more complex. You're going to run into issues. So that's something we'll probably be talking next month in October. An hour. Jeff, is that 1 hour with SSMA or is it 1 hour with Access? Thank you, Klaus, for the information version. Okay, so it takes an hour SSMA. It would never happen with SQL Server with Access. I give you an idea of that. One time I had to insert 100,000 records, right? And I said, I'll try Access. I'd link the SQL Server table to the Access front end. I'd do an update query, an insert query. And I go, and I call them coffee breaks because you have enough time. You start the query to insert 100,000 records. You have enough time to go get a coffee, go talk to Bill to see if he started watching season 2 of The Boys on Amazon Prime Video. Come back to your desk, check on your emails on your cell phone, and then glance up at your screen, and maybe it's halfway done, right? So it's just a pain to insert records into SQL Server with a front end. All right, so this is one of my favorite slides because it really is. It really does encapsulate the issues you're going to have when you migrate Access SQL Server. Number one is table with no indexes. Any Access developers who don't use SQL Server will tell you if you create a SQL Server table with no index, you'll be able to link it to the front end, but you won't be able to edit the data. You need an index in SQL Server. Foreign keys are not automatically created in SQL Server, right? So think about, for example, an order system. You have an order header table, an order items table. The order items table has a foreign key called order ID. Well, when you put order ID, when you design that table in Access, order ID automatically gets an index as a foreign key. And not so with SQL Server Migration Assistant. Well, with SQL Server. With SQL Server, you have to add those foreign keys to your table. So that's a gotcha. We're so used to Access to have Access do that for us, because basically there's a rule in Access that any table, any field that adds an ID, it automatically creates a foreign index for it. One of the other things that we as developers hate is customers want to use a primary key to mean something, right? Going back to the order system. I've had customers tell me, I want the order ID to be the first 2 initials of the state, followed by the date of the order, followed by who was the rep that sold it. I mean, before you know it, there's these complex rules around primary key, and it's just a mess. And so I usually convince them I'll add your field, but I still insert a new primary key that's auto incremented, because I just don't want the whole system to fall down like a deck of cards, like a house of cards, right, on me when the primary key starts causing problems. All right. Yep, Ken, no natural keys. Able to handle more than one auto key. Oh, thank you. Thank you for Klaus for that. All right. Now, I think I'm going to be handling, we're going to be talking about this last point, employee design queries here shortly. All right. So you've migrated your data to SQL Server. You've added foreign keys where needed. You linked it back to the Access front end. Now, would you consider that this whole thing I'm talking about is the first way, is the first pass. Now you need to run your queries and reports and forms to see if they're slow. And if they're slow, right? So say, for example, I had an instance where one of my developers calls me up, not Mark, who's on the call, but somebody else calls me up and says, Juan, this report is running 35 seconds with SQL Server. And I'm like, okay, all right. Have you created the view? No, not yet. Have you created a store procedure maybe? No, not yet. So let's run it by the customer. So we we told the customer was so happy. He's like, what? 35 seconds? That report takes several minutes in Access. So I'm super glad that you were able to, well, we can probably get that down to a lot less if we create views or store procedures. He's like, no, don't bother. We got a tight budget. Let's move on to other things. So no need to create views for everything, but usually when we design a Access with SQL Server system in the cloud, our goal is 3 seconds to load forms, right? 1001, 1002, 1003. Now, one of my customers is a medical manufacturing company located in Minnesota. And they have, I kid you not, they have 30 reps answering the phone there. 30 people in the customer service alone. So it's 100 people in this company using the Access SQL Server, right? And they have 30 people answering the phone. And before I got involved, the prior developer was not a SQL Server expert. I mean, he basically just linked the tables to the front end. He did everything in the front end. That was his spiel, right? That's all he did. So they hired me, and I noticed it's taking 35 seconds to load the patient form. And when you count 35 seconds times the number of operators in that place and the number of times they have to look up patients, that's an obscene amount of time productivity that you have to wait. Now, I was making this I was telling this to my wife. She's like, 35 seconds? That doesn't sound like a lot to me. I'm like, 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 5, 1006. And she's looking at me. I'm doing this 10, 2011, and she's looking at me perplexed, and she realizes when I get to 1015 that I'm going to take all the 35 seconds. By the time I reached 1025, she was ready to kill me. She's like, will you stop already? I get it. It's slow. Okay, I get it. So it's a real, it's an eternity, basically, is what we're saying. So I was able to optimize it at 3 seconds by adding a view. A simple view took care of the problem, right? The other developer didn't know about views, didn't care about learning views. I created a view, linked it back, and that to them, that's what sealed it with them. This is our guy. So Juan and IT Impact, these are our guys. They get it. They understand us, and they understand how to do this. So that was impressive. All I did was a view. I did a lot more for them since then, so they're really quite happy. Now, hybrid queries are the worst kind of queries. Yeah, and this is a very simple example of this. Let's say, for example, the state table, right? You have a state table in SQL Server. It has a list of states, right? Illinois, Indiana, Alabama, and all that. There's only 50 states in the territories. We're not making states every year, although there's talk about making Washington, D.C. a state and Puerto Rico a state in the future, but we're not making states every month, right? So basically, it's a static table. Well, when you have a state table in Access front end only, and you don't have it in SQL Server, when you have a query that involves a state table in SQL Server, if you don't have that table in SQL Server is like, I don't see a SQL Server table, SQL Server. So what it does, it pushes all that data to Access, right? So your query has a mix of local tables and SQL Server tables in it. And if you're not careful, you end up with a hybrid query. And what happens with a hybrid query is that SQL Server throws up its hands and says, I don't have a state table. Here's the data from every table in that query, and Access, you do the query. And that's a huge expense. That's a very inefficient way of managing queries. You want to avoid that particular situation. The way we avoid it is we make sure that we have a state table in that case, both from the front end, right? So we load combo boxes using the local SQL Server table, and then we have a SQL Server table and the SQL in the cloud, so that it doesn't become a hybrid query. So please avoid these. Thanks, Mark, for the comment there. All right, so look, this has been an introduction to Access SQL Server. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'd like to now open the microphones up here and ask you guys if you have any questions, and open up the questions, comments, and criticisms. Did you guys like the presentation?
Oh, yeah. That's
great.
Thank you.
Great. Are you thinking about using SQL Server, Ken and Mike?
Yeah. Good. can you pass a parameter to a view? You can't, can you?
I'm sorry?
Can you pass a parameter to a view?
Yeah, so the way you do that is you link that view like another table in your Access front end, and then you create a query against that view, and you use your query criteria for it in the query itself in Access, right? So to access just another table, you know it's a view, and in the query there you can do that. That's one way. The other way would be a pass-through query, and we'll be talking about that next month. Pass-through query that you can modify the SQL to
Yeah,
add
but a pass-through query
criteria.
isn't going to be editable.
No, it's not going to be editable. That's the number one drawback. So you want to pass criteria to your views using a query and access.
Yeah, okay, that's what I thought. Thanks.
All right. Well, yes. Anybody else?
Yeah, if you want a parameter on a query, I think you have to do it. I personally do a table in SQL Server where the parameters are, and link the table within the query on the SQL Server. Then I have my parameters.
Thank you, Clark. That is another way of doing it. Thank you very much. All right, so I got two questions from Jeff. He says, what's the best way to allow current users access to SQL tables and the next is VPN? And Jeff, one of the things you have to realize is Access does not work well with a VPN. It's terribly slow. It's not impossible. So once one of the advantages of using SQL Server, you can now, I'm getting some feedback. So if you guys can mute your microphone, if you're not going to ask a question, I'll ask that everyone mute their microphone. Thank you. Somebody just muted that. Took care. Oof. All right. So that's the advantage of using SQL Server if you have VPN, right? Because now you have a traveling user, you have a salesman who's traveling from town to town, and he can connect with VPN and use your Access application. Now, the way it should work is the Access application is running local on that laptop, and they have a VPN tunnel that connects to the SQL Server back at work. So that's the way you work with traveling users. Now, keep in mind that VPN tunnel is going to cost you more, right? Because now you got to go through encryption, decryption, and so you may have to optimize even further than you would than that user was located inside the building. So the optimal setup would be to have a remote desktop or terminal services and the corporation, so they connect via VPN and then they connect via remote desktop. That's something that sometimes is not available. So you can use the front end, but we've been able to use Access on a local laptop over VPN, so SQL Server and Enterprise, not a problem. Great question, by the way, Jeff. All right, any other questions?
Yeah, I'd have to agree that the RDP is a much better way of doing it.
I'm sorry, the RDP?
Yeah, the RDP is much more effective than trying to use a VPN.
Okay, what does IDP stand for?
Remote desktop?
Oh, RDP, yes, Remote Desktop Protocol, yes, thank you very much. James got a question. I've gotten WVD, Windows Virtual Desktop running in Azure with Access. Azure AD and Azure Domain Service for virtual access environment. Well, James, you're a better man than I am because that stuff is not easy to set up. We've been trying to make a goal of it. There's all kinds of weird things you have to do to get that set up. So God bless you, man, if you got it working. So do you have a question for me on that? Because I think you should give us a class on how to use all those technologies in the future. So hit me up. I'd love to have you as a guest later on this year, and you can show us how you set that all up.
Yeah, if I could, replicate it, because it took many iterations and tech support calls, but we got it figured out. It's not cheap, but if you're a 501c3, which a lot of our clients are, you can get cheaper. Azure, $3,500 in Azure credits a year, so it doesn't matter to them because it costs at least
$3,500. Wow.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and get 10 free licenses of Office too. So for nonprofits, that's the way to go. And we can order that through TechSoup or some of the other distributors too. So yeah, it's a great deal for nonprofits.
I would
to move
love to see a
everything to the
blog
cloud.
post on that, Jeff. If you can write a blog post, send me the link. That'd be great. I'd love to see a blog. I'm going to talk about that. I'll just set that all up.
Okay.
Parallels could be another way to reduce the cost. Well, parallels, the only parallels I know is parallels for Mac. Is that what you're talking about, Kent? Parallels for Mac, where you could run Windows on a Mac? That's the only parallels I know. I'm not aware of any other parallel.
No, it's a technology that really allows you to manage the number of users you have to a VM. So you're really only paying for the number of concurrent users, not for the total number of users.
Okay. Do you have a link on that that you can pass along to everyone here?
Yeah, I'll see if I can find it. I'll put it up.
Thank you. Mike has a question in Schema Design. Go ahead, Mike.
All right, thank you. Hey, I've got a little database that's going to track beekeeping inspections. And I have like 6 tables that have the parent-child relationship. And I have 5 separate tables that are the many-to-many relationship from each of those tables.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted versions. So if I did an inspection, I have all this data, and I'm going to go do another inspection. I just wanted to take a version of the last inspection, copy all those records, and then just go tweak whatever the differences were.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up putting the top table, its key, if you will, in all of the transaction tables, the many-to-many tables. And I didn't know if I needed to do that, but I was afraid I wasn't going to get all the IDs to line up when I did all the appends. It worked, but I didn't know if I did some overkill in my design. Would I have still been able to follow the chain with all those parent-child relationships and still gotten all those IDs if I did a whole copy of all those data sets, all those records? I mean, like I said, the way I did it, I got it working, but I'm not sure if I did overkill in my design a little bit here.
Well, look, you got several things here, right? One of the things that, and we all do this, by the way. This is a great question because you're going to come across this many times, right? You may have a customer that says, I want to be able to duplicate prior estimate that's similar to what I'm working on. I don't want to start from scratch, right? So you have a copy estimate button, and then you identify which customer you're going to do it for, and then it copies these tables, these records, right, into the system. Now, when you do that is you want to do it in 2 steps, right? You want to do first the primary key, the primary table, not the child table, but the primary table first. Get the record that was inserted, right? And then do the secondary query for all the tables, all the secondary table queries, right? But one thing I would urge you to do is to consider adding another field in your primary table called copy ID or prior ID. And that would make it easier to set up the queries where you can just say, okay, I copy this primary record, right, like the order header. So let's go stick to the order header details scenario, right? You have an order header that's got your name, date of the order, maybe your address, right? Then you got order details, which is the items that you purchased for the order, right? So the order header has an order ID that gets copied to the field I just mentioned, copy ID or copy order ID, old order ID, whatever you want to name it. And then when you do a secondary query, it's a real no-brainer because then a secondary query for inserting the records of the child, you say, I want you to grab all these records from the primary table with this old ID and copy it over. That's one way of doing it. You want to be careful. It's called want to be careful with one way of doing it, but I don't do it that way. But usually what I do is I use a variable in my code to store the old ID, and then I use that variable going forward. And one of the variables that I love for doing that is called temp bar. So I don't know if you use temp bars in Access. If not, it's a great way to get introduced to that, where you use a temp bar in your query, right? So I do this process in my code. These queries run in my code. I use a temp bar or a variable to store the old ID, and that way I get around that. But sometimes you need to know what was your original order ID. And this is something we do a lot when we import data from an old system. Because when you import data from an old system, you're not necessarily going to preserve the old primary ID numbers, right? Yeah, for whatever reason, like that example I gave you where the customer has an old primary key, the first two letters are the state of the order, and I go do away all of that, but I now need to keep track of what that old ID was. So I'll put an old ID in the table in SQL Server, and I keep track of that when I migrate over in case there's any issues there. Okay, great to hear that you like 10 bars. All right, so with WVD, oh, I'm sorry to hear about the 1.4 million records got stalled there, Jeff. When you're doing that large of inserts, Jeff, are you wrapping that in a transaction so if it fails, it stops the whole thing, or you're just happy insert the 1.4 and you move on to doing that? Oh, it's an SSMA migration. Okay. And are you worried that there might be other users right now using that system that's doing blocks on that table as you're inserting? Because that could be a blocking issue when you have other people in there. All right, negative. Okay, good. And then just you. All right. Now, are you inserting in the cloud or local table, local SQL server in the network, or your computer? Which one of those three is it? Azure SQL. Okay. So you might be running into latency issues, especially since you're on the WebEx. If you're doing it on the same PC where you're on this WebEx and you see my image coming through, it might be choking your internet. This video might be choking your internet on your computer. Hopefully it'll maybe improve once you get off the call here. Oh, it's a different PC. All right, good. All right. So when you're doing Azure SQL, right, the thing about that is there's so many variables that can impact performance, right? There could be internet, there could be problems at the data center, there could be issues with the virtual machine the Azure SQL virtual machine. There is a virtual machine running in the background that does that. So those kind of performance issues are a little tougher to do because you're seeing migration assistant doing all that plumbing in the background for you, and you really have little control of those inserts, and just waiting it out is probably one of the things you have to do. All right. So I'm catching up with the comments here, guys. I'm sorry. I'm catching up with the comments here. I tried doing a pen query badges, but it's painful. Don't replace with overwrite tables option. SSMA badge, write views using CTEs. All right, CTEs. I love CTEs, Ken. Now you're talking about something that's near and dear to my heart. CTEs are great. That's a third month. So in November we'll be talking about CTEs. All right. So how does it deal with nulls and a unique index? It creates a filter index. Klaus already answered that question. All right. Thank you, Klaus. Catching up on all these great comments. This has been a great discussion. Sometimes I do these seminars and I get crickets back, and I'm like, okay, I guess I'm off to dinner, because usually I have dinner after I do this. All right, thank you so much for that parallels.com. Please, for that link, parallels.com. We're going to read up on that. Semi retired Series I or Series 1 programmer, Mike? Is that I, isn't it, or 1? Do you know how Azure DTUs affect performance? Yes.
Yeah. Hey.
Yes.
Okay. I got clear so I could I could actually talk to you. Yeah. So I'm just getting started with Azure SQL. So I went on and I got the most basic level. It's like $15 a month, which is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Amazing. But they offer all these different levels where you can throw in, I don't know, more cores or DTUs and all that stuff. But I don't know what I would get out of that.
Well, look, DTUs is the power behind the brawn, right? It's a brawn. It's like the engine size. So the more DTUs you can afford, the better off you'll be. Now, I'll be the first one to tell you a little trick, and that is, if you're going to, are you the one that's inserting this 1.4 million records? 2 million records? All right.
Yeah.
So one of the tricks is you can use PowerShell, or you can manually increase the DTUs for the time you need it. Like you can go to 20 DTUs for 1 hour. Really turbocharge it. It's going to be expensive for that 1 hour. It's going to turn out to be like what, $20 maybe to do the insert, and then you downsize it back to the. So you can go at 30 DTUs, 40 DTUs. And I've actually helped a client with a PowerShell script where during the day when he's got everybody logged in to his system, it's 80 DTUs, and then at night we throttle it back down to 20 because the same database is being used on the web, and he's got clients logging into the web app that we create for him. We don't really want to bring it down to 15 or 5 DTUs. And so during the day, it's 80 DTUs, and at night it goes down, and he just loves the fact that he saves all that money on that.
And will it have an effect on, like creating reports and?
Yes. I mean, having more DTUs, I mean, if you can afford more DTUs, the better off you'll be, right? At some point, if it gets cost prohibitive for some people, but, play with and Microsoft does not do a good job explaining how much your bill is. I never like to quote the bill of a customer. I tell them an idea. So it's going to be around $100. It's going to be around $200 based on what you tell me, because it's just so complex. The billing for Azure is so complex. But you play with the DTUs. You're at 15 right now. You're paying how much?
I don't think it's at 15. I can't really remember. I'm paying $15 a month.
Oh, you're paying $15 a month. All right. So that's the minimum size.
Yeah.
If you can afford to pay $20 or $50 or $100, whatever you want, that's what you want to be at. If you need it, right? If you need it, you need it. If you don't need it, then don't pay for it.
Yeah. And it's easy enough to go in there and just adjust that.
Yes, but when you're adjusting it, you have to wait a few seconds while it adjusts. It's not something where you can adjust immediately. It does take a little bit. Of time to convert over. But if right now in the middle of the night, nobody in it, it might be. You're surprisingly quick. I mean, it's going to probably be less than a minute, right? You can adjust it, do your insert, and see. So play with that setting. Spike the DTU. Try to do the insert. See if that helps.
Yeah, I will. I'll report back next meeting.
All right, sounds good.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. AS400 iSeries. All right, Mike. Thanks for letting me know that. Appreciate it. All right. I worked on System 3 system. All right. Well, now you're dating yourself, Mike.
Just keep it wide through here.
Yeah, we, by the way, if you do VMs in Azure, quick tip here, use the lab environment. We use lab environment for our virtual machines, and then we can tell them to shut down at 6 p.m. And from 6 p.m. until the next morning, when the employees start them up again, they do that. Because before it would be running 24/7, and we get this huge bill from Azure. Now we use the lab PCs, we do auto shutdown on them, and then it warns you it's about to shut down. So if the employee is using the machine at that time, he can cancel the shutdown, but it has saved us money.
Oh God.
All right, these are all great questions. Any final questions before we go? All right. So look, I have a lot of great tips. Go to accessexperts.com/start here, including some of the topics we'll be covering in October and November. Please make sure to join our SQL Server with Access group on LinkedIn. I'm the owner of the group. Connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/n/Juan Soto. Thank you for coming to this user group meeting. We'd love to have you at the future meetings, including Access Beginners and Access Lunchtime and Access ET. So watch out for those topics.
Oh, that's great.
One question.
Yes.
Where can I learn about replication? Because I think that replication where the master is the Azure one and you have two clients which are Express would be a very suitable thing if you, for example, if you have a shop with two or two shops which are linked together.
But you're talking about SQL Server Replication, right? Which is a topic that's beyond my expertise, unfortunately. I always start this presentation by saying I'm not a SQL Server expert. I'm an expert on Access with SQL Server. But, I can't help you. But if you need help with that particular issue, I do have a SQL Server consultant that can help you out with that. So hit me up. I can forward you his credentials, and he can probably steer you for free in the right direction. Or if you want to use his services, you're welcome to use them. As well.
Yeah,
so
I just think it because of the more and more using Azure at least as the backup, then you can do replication like that, even with two SQL Express engines at both sides.
Yeah, so I don't think replication is supported in SQL Server Express. I have to check, but I don't think that's supported because that's something Microsoft wants you to buy the license standard for that.
Yeah, but no, if you read out, there is one replication, the one which I need, which is replication on both sides, which is for going for and back.
Okay. I'll have to read up on that, Klaus. Thank you for bringing it to my attention. I didn't know you can do that with Express, so I'll definitely got to read up on
Yeah,
it.
and that is my idea, because you have, if you go Azure, the Azure SQL is always a big one, which allows replication. And if it's the replication master, then you can replicate between the master and the two others, which can be Express versions. And I think that is something which could be interesting for more than one person.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. Yeah. So I'm gonna bring up my contact information. This is all my contact information. I think that you're right. So let me look into that. Have you ever used it yourself or no?
No, I just wanted to learn.
Okay. All right.
Because I'm not, I don't use Azure at the moment, so I don't have expertise in that one.
Okay. All right. I don't use replication. That's something that's beyond what my small business clients need. But yeah, you can get quite involved with that. And honestly, if you have a mission critical app, right? So here's the thing. By the way, Mike, replication. Thanks, Leo. Replication. We're talking about here SQL Server Replication, not Access Replication. That's no longer. No, there is no Access Replication. But if you have a mission critical system that you cannot lose 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours on, and you need your application to switch over. Think about the complexity of this. You got a main SQL Server database in the data center in the East Coast, and now that data center goes offline, and you're losing lots of money every hour. It's gone. You can configure access to switch over to another data center that has replication going on the West Coast, and then once the East Coast is back online, switch it back to East. Those kind of movements for the front end, that requires a lot of extensive manipulation of access beyond what we would probably discuss in this group, but it is possible. And
I know.
It is something that you can do, but that has to be on Azure, and you have to pay for it. Think about that. Now you're paying double because now you have the East Coast, West Coast, and so forth.
Problem is, if when I get a mission critical application, I never would do it with Express. I always would say the client buy the right version for it.
Okay.
Because then you have all possibilities you need.
Yeah.
But if you have, for example, two shoe shops, which say who says where the man one sits in city A and the other in city B, their shops, and the master says, oh, it's okay if we each afternoon if we replicate, or in the morning, middle, and evening, that's enough.
Okay.
It's just a small shop with Express engines at both sides.
You're making my point, Klaus, that you're probably way ahead of most people when it comes to this technology. I'm impressed, and the fact that you're retired, A, and B, you're doing these kind of fancy things with Access SQL Server. My hat's off to you, my friend.
Yeah, just to say. And by the way, I'm a fan of the Blazor of Blazor and not of Powerapps.
Thanks. And what time is it right now in Germany, Klaus?
3 o'clock.
3 o'clock in the morning. Well, even more impressed now with you. Thank you so much for joining. And thanks to everyone who came today. My name is Juan Soto. I appreciate everybody attending. Join us next month in October. We have the second version of this. And as always, we do this out of love. We don't make any money out of it. So we appreciate the comments and the questions because it really makes the time fly by. We'll see you.
If you save, interrupt. If you save that film, can you save the chat as well?
I just did. You're going to see the chat. Thank you for that suggestion.
I mean, if you say we can relook the session. So
Yes.
and,
No, you can. I think you can copy it too, but I can. If you email me, I'll reply back with all the links.
yeah, I can. I think I can copy it too. Yeah.
All right, sounds good. I'll leave it running for a few seconds more. I'm gonna go and have dinner, and I will see you guys next month. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Juan.
Thanks, Ben. Thank you very much, everyone.